Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Andy Campbell and this is 12 and a half minutes, your weekly hit of hope, information and inspiration brought to you by Elevator, one of Scotland's leading entrepreneurial and business support organisations. Over the years at Elevator, we have really fostered a fantastic network of many organisations, support partners, experts and mentors. We're really so thankful for this network and for all of the hard work that they provide to support us and supporting the companies that we work with. And it was brilliant to catch up earlier this week with one such person who spends a lot of his time helping Elevator and helping the companies that we work with. Bob Keiller is an international businessman and a well-known entrepreneur and well-known certainly throughout Elevator. So when I caught up with him, we pre-recorded an interview and here's what we covered. Well, good afternoon, Bob, and thank you for joining us on 12 and a half minutes.
Afternoon, Andy, yeah.
And how's lockdown been going for you, Bob?
I've got nothing to complain about. There's other people with much bigger problems than me. It's been good in many senses that I've been able to get some projects done that I've always been putting off. But it's almost allowed me to be less geographically restricted. So I'm now able to talk to people that previously I would have felt it had to be face to face, it had to be in person, and it had to involve travel. So it's kind of opened things up in some ways.
So adapting to the new normal of being able to work at home, Bob. Well, listen, thank you for joining us in 12 and a half minutes and obviously to this pre-recorded session. So I appreciate you being able to spend the time with us today. So in usual 12 and a half minutes, I'm going to hand over to you, Bob, to give us a general 2 or 3 minute overview on your life and career to date, and then we'll come in with some questions. But over to you now, Bob.
Okay, so I was brought up in the borders town of Jedburgh in the southern part of Scotland, or the deep south as we call it. Grew up in a council house, went to the only school in the town, and went on to university after that, and I did a master's in electronic engineering. I thought that being an engineer would be a good thing to do, so I did some time with Hewlett-Packard, and I kind of realised that being involved in serious engineering design, I felt it wasn't quite with me. I wanted something that involved a bit more challenge, a bit more people. So I left that and I went and joined the oil and gas industry, and I worked for big companies, small companies. I worked offshore, I worked onshore, I worked for operating companies, so the people that actually kind of the frontline companies, and then I worked for the service companies as well. So I got lots of different perspectives, and I think I've estimated over a period of 30 years, I did about 18 different roles for 10 different organizations. So you could say that I spent a lot of time moving between roles. It didn't feel like that at the time, but on average, I was in any role for about 18 months. And on average, I was in any business for about 3 years before I moved on. So you could say that I was quite fickle in that sense. But what that allowed me to do was to pick up a lot of different experiences on the way. In 2006, 2005 actually, I saw an opportunity to basically to buy the part of the business that I was working in. So I went and borrowed a lot of money, bought a business, and the plan was to grow that business over 5 years and then float it. For a number of reasons, the plan had to be changed more than once. In fact, it changed 4 or 5 times. But ultimately, 5 years later, I was able to sell that business. And then I had the challenge of integrating the 9,000 people that were working for me with the 14,000 people that worked in the same area for the company that bought me. And then took over as CEO of the whole of that business, where I had over 50,000 employees. Ran that business as CEO, stayed in that business for a total of 5 years plus 1 week. My commitment up front was to stay there for 5 years. And then I stood down from that to spend time focused on helping others. Throughout that period as well, I've also been chair of various organisations. So I was chair of Scottish Enterprise, I was chair of Entrepreneurial Scotland, and I've been a chair of several trade bodies associated with the oil and gas industry. And now I spend my time helping other people. So I spend 4 days a week, unpaid, helping entrepreneurs, helping social enterprises, and helping charities, putting back because I can.
Fantastic, Bob, and obviously we've built up a really good relationship with you at Elevator. You're well known throughout our centres, and the advice and support that you've been able to provide to Elevator, and most importantly to the companies that have gone through on our programs, has been hugely invaluable. So just taking the opportunity to thank you very publicly, Bob, for all the time that you've been able to dedicate. It really is.
You're welcome, man. I really enjoy it. I do really enjoy working with the variety of entrepreneurs and all the fantastic ideas that they've got.
Yeah, brilliant. So, Bob, we're clearly in uncharted territory with regards to our current business environment due to COVID. And I know that you're a person that always sees the glass half full. And I just wanted to get an insight into your thoughts on COVID. Is it a catastrophe, or are there opportunities out there that we should be thinking about, Bob?
Again, I think it's a mindset thing, Andy. For me, is there are certainly industries and there are sectors that have been hugely impacted by the changes. And I wouldn't want to belittle any of the impact it's had on people. There's going to be people losing their jobs, and people have lost their jobs already. So I wouldn't want to belittle any of that at all. But on the other side of that, change always brings opportunity. And I think there are changes taking place in society, in our work habits, our living habits, our social habits, but have to present opportunities for other people. I mean, if you're in a business that previously was struggled to establish an online foothold, perhaps now is the time where you're actually able to increase that. So yeah, I think there are as many opportunities as there are downsides. But I would say that doesn't mean to say that everything's rosy for everybody, because a lot of people face a lot of difficult, challenging times ahead.
Yeah, and indeed, and it's many different sectors will be impacted in many different ways, and of course the timeline of effect when it really hits and penetrates on a particular industry is yet to be really fully known. But I guess it's always trying to seek the opportunities. How can you adapt your business to try and thrive under these difficult times? And I guess one of the key factors in any business, Bob, is company culture. And I know that you're a huge advocate of having very strong company cultures within the organizations you've worked at, and putting in core principles in place to be able to underpin those cultural directions that you're looking to take. So it'd be good to get an insight into your core principle thoughts, Bob.
Yeah, I mean, having mentioned that I work for a number of different organizations and a number of different roles, that also exposed me to lots of different cultures. And as a result of that, I was able to see the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I was often left wondering, why do people behave in this way when clearly the business would operate better, purely even from a financial perspective, it would operate better if everyone was pulling in the same direction. And I think I realised then there had to be a better way. So when I did a management buyout in 2006, I thought, this is the ideal opportunity to do things the way that I thought they should be done. So a concentration on what is company culture, how do you build it, how do you maintain it, how do you promote it, how do you get people bought into it, all of the things around about that. How do you develop core values? How do you make them more than simply marketing material? And all of the mistakes that we made on that journey, but ultimately ended up with something pretty special. Pretty special not just for the staff, but also for the customers and potentially for the investors as well. And I thought there's definitely something here for me that says that if you can get the culture right in an organisation, you have to be good at what you do, by the way. This is not an excuse for not being good at your core products and services. But if you're good at your own core products and services, if you also have a great culture, it can be fantastic for a business to realise that you can operate with fewer rules and regulations if everybody knows what they're doing is in line with a set of agreed principles. If you know that everybody's going to behave in the right way, even when they're not being observed or supervised, then you can relax a little bit in the knowledge that people are not going to agree to things they shouldn't be agreeing to, or doing stuff they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, and in terms of those core principles, Bob, I guess if you're a startup business, it's maybe easy to establish those early on and then work in that fashion. But for perhaps more established companies that have not put those in place, integrating core principles might be more challenging. How can companies successfully go about generating core principles and core beliefs, and then implementing them and putting them into practice in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of companies that come to that journey. They say, I wish we'd done this earlier, but how do we do it now? Because we've been operating for 9 years and we've got 200 people spread across the country. It's going to be really tricky. But you've got to start somewhere, and start somewhere. It starts about discussing and talking about, well, what do we really stand for? What do we want to be known for? And some of these principles will be emergent from this is what we do and this is what we're already known for. However, there's some of these will be aspirational. This is what we would like to be known for. And this is a core principle that we would like to be at the heart of our business, even if it isn't there today. So that process of recognition and discovery, the more people that can be involved in it, the better. But ultimately, you need to be careful it doesn't end up just being some sort of mushy soup that tries to cover all the bases. When in reality, there has to be an element here that says, no, these are the things that define us and set us apart from other organizations. And therefore, we have to keep them small in number, because if we've got 25 of them, nobody will ever remember them. So they need to be a handful, they need to be a small number, and they need to be important enough that they shape our key decisions. So if they're all woolly and fluffy and they don't help us to decide whether or not we're going to accept a contract or hire somebody or fire somebody, then they're not working for us. So there's something there about having an edge to them. So they've got to be clear enough to be useful and yet high enough level to apply across the whole organization. So it's a tricky balance to get right.
Yeah, and presumably it's you don't just create them and forget about them. There's a continual process of making sure that everything adheres to them, and maybe perhaps if things are not pointing in the same direction as the company's core principles, you have to take some remedial action, perhaps, Bob.
Definitely. I mean, the way I think I've described it in the past, it's like creating a formal garden from a piece of wasteland. You need to design it, you need to lay all the foundations, you need to get it planted, you need to nurture it, and then you need to maintain it. And if you stop maintaining it, after 2 or 3 weeks, the grass has grown over the slabs and the steps are beginning to crack and things fall apart. It goes back to the wild state very, very quickly. So culture for that, for me, is you need to maintain it, which involves everybody in leadership roles, whether it's formal or informal, understanding their responsibilities, understanding how they're going to project this. And it involves lots of messaging and listening and communication, which ultimately becomes a big part of people's jobs. And for a lot of businesses, they think, well, hang on a minute, this is something that we would like to pass on to the HR department, or we'd like to pass on to somebody else. And I always go back to, if you want the culture to be there, to be in a certain way, you need to live and breathe it. Because if you don't live and breathe it, then why should anyone else?
Yeah, and it's not just about making the workplace a nice place to work or a nice environment to work. It's got tangible benefits. It delivers results. It can secure contract wins and increase value in securing the business going forward. Definitely.
I mean, why would you do it otherwise? Why would you put in place a culture that was counterproductive to your business? What you want is a culture that your staff appreciate is good for business, your customers value and want to do more business with you, and people that you've not yet worked with want to become your customers. So it has to be there. It has to be totally consistent with your business objectives, even if sometimes it forces you to turn down business because you can't do it in line or in keeping with your core principles or your core values, because that's a real acid test. These things have to apply all the time. You can't just say, well, we're going to switch them off because this job's an important one and we need to take it. So saying no to your customers actually sometimes is the biggest signal you can give them that we're serious about this and we're not going to compromise on it.
Yeah, absolutely something that's imperative with every single business, and it's something that I know you support us with Elevator, to make sure that our companies are really trying to put those values and core beliefs in place. Bob, one of the other areas that you work with is storytelling, Bob, and it's you give over your time, particularly in some of the workshops that you deliver. The engagement is brilliant, and ultimately the content is it's wonderful. It really does make a difference. It moves the dial with so many of our businesses, and that's focusing on really strong and effective communication skills, but not just doing them in rather a standard boring fashion, but really engaging in the art of storytelling. Bob, that's one of your key principles as well. It'd be good to hear a little bit more about your thoughts on the importance of storytelling in business.
Yeah, it's interesting that telling stories to each other is the oldest and most effective form of human communication, bar none. And yet in business, we've kind of squeezed it out a little bit, and we tend to talk about data and graphs and bullet points on slides, and we've kind of sterilized a lot of the communication. And in doing so, we've kind of taken out a lot of the meaning and the connection. If we want people to take action, if we want people to remember things, there needs to be an emotional response to what we're saying. You don't get an emotional response from putting up a histogram showing 57 data points. But if you can tell a powerful story with an example that involves struggle and overcoming the struggle and some sort of resolution, and maybe even an element of intrigue at the start, drama in the middle, and surprise at the end, it's amazing how people will remember that story for years to come. I've been stopped by people that I've spoken to, and 8 years after I've done a presentation, I'll say, I'll still remember that time when you talked about this. And I'm like, isn't that interesting? Because you've forgotten everything else I presented on that day, but that was the thing that stuck with you. Because as human beings, we're almost kind of preconditioned to talk about stories and to listen to stories. That's why when you're sitting having a coffee with somebody and somebody says something, all of a sudden it sparks off an idea in your head. You say, oh yeah, I remember the time when, and you think, I've not thought about that for 20 years.
Yep.
And yet I'm telling you the story as if it was yesterday. So we're all, why would we not tap into that psyche that says we're preordained to accept, to receive, and to tell stories? And all I'm saying is, well, why don't you codify that and take it into a business environment and use it as part of your effective communication?
Oh, that's fantastic, Bob, and a wonderful note to finish on. 12 and a half minutes flies by so quickly. And, you know, I was going to say we could do another 12 and a half minutes on storytelling alone, but of course we could do hours and hours and hours on storytelling or any aspect of company culture. Bob, it's been a real pleasure to have you on the programme today. We know that you support our companies so much, and we look forward to continuing to work with you going forward. But Bob Keiller, thank you so much indeed.
Thank you, Andy.
Well, that was just fantastic, wasn't it? Huge thanks to Bob for joining us earlier on this week. At Elevator, we really are so fortunate to work with Bob and the impact that he has on all of the founders that go through our Accelerator programs and other business support services that we offer at Accelerator. They really are spoiled with someone of Bob's caliber. We broadcast this live every Friday at 3 p.m. Make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe. We're on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So make sure you follow us on those social media networks. Next week, we have Scottish Women of the Year 2019. Quadruple amputee, now founder of her own charity, Finding Your Feet. We have Dr. Cor Hutton coming along to tell her own inspiring story. So join me next week, Friday at 3 p.m. Have a great weekend and be brave.